All right, if you've seen my other videos, then you know that I've been working on this laundry room for a pretty long time now. We completed our built-ins, we completed the pocket door, but now we need to move over to this door. If I had left this the same door it was before, I think it would just look a little bit silly because this one is now so large and grand and this is just a normal, builder grade door. So what we need to do is actually adjust the framing here. I need to widen this because I want both doors to be identical. So this needs to be wider. It also needs to be taller. I know this looks very structural. This is a big old header that we've got here. But just like with the other side, I hired a structural engineer to come over. They took a look at it. We cut a little hole in the ceiling even to make sure. And it's not structural. It's totally fine for me to get rid of this. Now it's not gonna be a pocket door. This one, this is the pocket for this door, so there's nowhere for this one to go. And also pocket doors on bathrooms, just like, I don't know, not a great idea anyways. Doesn't keep sound out very well. So this one will be a traditional swinging door. It'll swing in just like the current door does, but it's gonna be the exact same size as this one. Anyways, enough talking, let's get into it.
Okay, this build starts like pretty much any other one, and that's with demolition. So what you see here is that I'm just taking the drywall down. I like to use one of the multi-tools, the buzzy guys, and I just cut along where I know there are studs. In this case, it was at the seams of the wall. Then I take my measurements, and what I'm really measuring for is how big I need to make the new opening. I'm basing this opening off of the other door that I've already built. So I've got a YouTube video on that as well. I made a pocket door for our laundry room. All right, so here's the next step in our process, and that's going to be getting the framing done for this, or not the framing, more so the trimming. The framing is already done. I need to trim this out to make a home for the door to go in that we're gonna build. So what I have to account for is the width of this stud. It's a 2x4, means this is 3.5 inches wide, but then I need the trimming to go out, or casing, I guess might be the word, whatever. The casing to extend out the depth of the drywall. So it's gonna depend on what drywall you're using. I'm using 1/2 inch drywall, or whoever built the house was using it. I'm just sticking with what was already here. So 1/2 inch drywall out past it, that means this needs to be 3.5 plus a 1/2 on each side. So in total, this is gonna be 4.5 inches in width. Doing the sides here, easy, but once I get to the top, this is gonna be an arch. I'll do a bent lamination, a bunch of thin pieces of wood like I did on the other door, bend it, glue it up, and then I'll have my arch for the top. Anyways, yeah, let's get to it. The next step in the framing process is to create the arches. So that's what I'm doing here. The way I did this is I measured the opening, how wide across it was. I think it was something like 36 inches across. And I set my radius jig for 36 inches. Then I take a piece of plywood that's 36 inches across and square, and I cut a 36-inch circle out, which leaves me with these corners that are perfect 36-inch radius corners, and I can go ahead and screw those into the framing to give myself a perfect arch to work with. Now it's time to actually cut the walnut that I need to make this casing for the arch door. All right, so I cut my first strip. I made it a little bit oversized width-wise. It needed to be 4.5 inches. I went to 4 5/8. It's gonna give me a little bit of wiggle room to sand it down and make it fit right in case my glue up goes a little crooked. But I took it down to about 1/8 of an inch. And what we're gonna find out now is we're gonna go inside and see if I can put it in the doorway and it not break when I force it to the curve that we've got in that doorway. I think we're gonna be okay. It feels like it's curving pretty good here. Then I'll just have to cut enough pieces to this thickness that when I stack them all together and curve them, it equals 3/4 of an inch, because that's how thick I want my trim to be inside of this doorway. So let's go check this out inside. Very quick test here. I'm just looking to see if the piece will snap when I force it into this arch. Okay, so I've got all of my thin pieces cut out here. You can see it's a little bit thicker than 3/4 of an inch. Well, actually, I don't know if you could tell that on camera, but it is. I cut extras because inside of the jamb, I'm gonna need a thinner strip of wood that sticks out, because that's what the door hits when it closes. It closes inside this bigger trim, and then there's a thin strip that runs through where the door actually seals against. So I made some extras. Figured I should just do that now and get it out of the way. They are pretty flexible, and you can see when all stacked together, they still maintain that flexibility. So we'll be putting a layer of glue between every single piece, and then I need a form to clamp it up into.
I've got this one from doing the trim for the pocket door. So you can see there's a gap of 3/4 of an inch between here. So it's made so that I can put all those pieces in and then clamp this with all the pieces in the middle. It's too skinny though, as you can see, because the trim for the pocket door was only about an inch thick. Now we're dealing with 4.5 inch thickness. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use these and I'm gonna modify them. So I'm just gonna keep adding layers of plywood until it's as thick as I need it to be. And I'll probably just rough cut everything on the bandsaw and then use these as templates over on my router table. And I should be able to pump this out pretty quick. So that's the next step. Get these molds ready. Hopefully I can get these in clamps overnight so I can go to bed and let them clamp up. Everything I've read online says you want like at least 24 hours in the clamps. So yeah, hopefully I can get that done tonight.
And here's a quick look at how I modified these. So I just kept rough cutting the curves on the bandsaw, and then I would take them over and I would screw them into the mold. Then I would take a flush cut router bit and I would use that router bit to trim them so that they matched perfectly. Then what you see me doing here is actually just a dry fit. It's a good idea to do a dry fit with stuff like this just to make sure that your pieces aren't going to snap or that there aren't any, unforeseen problems. Because once the glue goes on, it's pretty hard to take the glue off. So it's always a good idea to do a dry fit, not just with curving things, but really with any sort of glue up. As you can see here, there's no reason to go light on the glue. I'm gluing on top of my work surface, and this is a melamine top, so glue doesn't stick to it. If you are using, an MDF or a plywood top or anything like that, be careful because you could end up gluing your piece to your work table. You don't want that. So I start throwing all the clamps in. You're going to see that I come by with a block here, and I use the block to sort of smack down on the pieces so I can keep them as flat as possible. The better you can do this glue up, the less work you're going to have later. As you heard before, I left myself 1/8 of an inch extra material, so I really don't have a ton of wiggle room here if I mess up, because once I start going to clean the thing up, if I have to remove more than 1/8 inch of material to clean it up, it's going to be too small. Pulling them out of clamps like that is really satisfying, and even more satisfying is bringing them inside and seeing that it actually fits the arch like I need it to. Now to clean it up, you see I just took it over my joiner there. Does a really good job of cleaning the thing up, and then with a straight edge, I mark where 90 degrees would be. When I put it on the table like this, it wasn't quite sitting flat because it compresses a bit when it's inside of the arch. So it was a good idea for me to make those flat marks when it was compressed in the archway and not just make a straight cut when it was uncompressed sitting on the table. Then to attach it to the vertical pieces, I just use some pocket holes and some screws. These end up opening up a little bit once I put it in, and I just use the old trick of throwing some glue in the crack and running the sander over it without any dust collection, and then the dust grabs the glue and it makes a perfect filler. I end up mounting this with trim head screws. I plan on putting the centerpiece where the door is going to sit against over those screws so you won't see them. Now it's time to build the door. So I bring in a piece of plywood that's actually going to be the core of the door, and I trace the exact shape of that opening onto the plywood. Then I bring that plywood out into the garage and I start cutting that shape out. You're going to see I actually mess up a little bit here, so I bring it in and I check to see how the fit is. I use some shims to hold it in place, and the fit looked great, but the problem, I don't want the edges of this door to be raw plywood, so I needed to actually cut this thing about 1/8 of an inch smaller all the way around so that I could add some 1/8 inch walnut edge banding, essentially. That's what I'm holding up for the camera here. So what I'm doing here is I'm measuring 1/8 of an inch all the way around the door, and I'm repeating that process. So I go back with the track saw and I follow those lines and I make the door even smaller. Then I can take the edge banding that I just cut out from my walnut and I can wrap the door in it. You can see I use a whole lot of bandy clamps here from Rockler. Rockler, please sponsor me. And then I use a pin nailer just for some added assurance there. Those pin nails are going into the top of the door, so you're not going to see them anyways. And I go back in, test the fit once again. I had a great fit. Last step is to sand the edge banding down flush to the door.
All right, so I've got my walnut wrapped around the edges of this thing, which means I'm ready now to start milling up more walnut. I'm gonna be resawing walnut, pretty thin, and then essentially just veneering this entire piece of plywood to make it look like a solid walnut door. The consideration I need to make now is how thick do I make the door? So how thick does the veneer need to be to add up to the final thickness of the door? This is the hardware that I have decided to go with. I could change my mind. It looks a little more gold than I wanted. I was going for like a brushed brass look. But you can see it's fully closed right now. So my door needs to be at least this thick. Check the instructions. It says that it needs to be between 1 3/8 and 1 3/4. So I need to, do the math here. My core of plywood is 3/4 inch thick. So how thick does my walnut need to be to reach those final dimensions so that my door handle can mount to it and work correctly? So that's what we're doing next. Gonna do a little math, and then it's time to resaw and mill a ton of walnut so that I can get this door looking pretty.
I assume you guys don't really want to watch me mill up a bunch of wood, but basically I had to make the wood about 1/4 inch thick for all of the side pieces of this door. So then the nice thing about having a big piece of plywood like this that I'm going to be putting the pieces on is I can design it directly onto that piece of plywood. So I went around, I just copied the pocket door that I had made before so that they both matched, and I drew out exactly what I wanted this design to look like. Then with all the pieces that I cut and milled up, I just laid them out roughly so I could get an idea of what the door needed to look like.
All right, cool. So we've got our rails and stiles, the ones that go along the edges and then cut through the middle. We've got those all cut and planed and they're all good to go. So all I need to do now is make a bunch of thinner material that's going to fill and make up the interior panels. So I need to decide on a thickness that'll look good because I don't want, big piece, and then like a little sliver or something. So I've got to figure out the width that'll fill these cavities and make it look good. And I can only go up to 8 inches thick because that's as thick as my joiner is. Let's go.
So the final width of those pieces ended up being a little over 6 inches wide, if you were curious. Next up, I had to figure out how to do the arch. So I thought about doing a bent lamination, but I decided that I wanted to try something different here. Part of it was laziness, and I wanted to see how it would look with just vertical straight grain. So I glued up a bunch of pieces here vertically, and while they're drying, I went ahead and laid out my panel pieces. And what I noticed is that they kind of blend together where they meet each other. And I wanted it to be more distinct. So I ran a chamfer on all of the pieces where they meet, and it just gives a little more definition so you can tell that those are different pieces. Anyways, back to the arch. So the glue has dried and I've got my arch here. What I do is I just put it back directly onto the door. There were lines there where I had lined it up before. It's hard to see in the video, but I could put it down exactly where it went before. Then all I have to do is set up my router with the circle jig again, and I can cut out a perfect circle. Then on the other side, I'll use the jig as well, but I'll also use a router bit with a flush trim bit so that this arch piece ends up matching the door perfectly. So I take some double-sided tape, I stick it down, I grab my router, and I set the radius to what it needs to be here. I forget what that number was, and I run it across. For the outside, I make it a little bit bigger because I plan on running a flush trim bit around it again. That interior panel needs to get cut down to the right size, and I also cut a relief on the arch so that the panel sits inside of those outside pieces, because although everything is pretty thin here, there is still a chance that the wood will expand or contract, and I don't want any raw edges showing. You can see here what I'm talking about. I cut this little groove so that the pieces can slide underneath those outside edges. This is the most satisfying part so far. I got to put all the pieces down and visualize what the door is gonna look like. But then it's quickly followed by the worst part of woodworking, which was sanding, because I need all of those transitions to fit nice. Then I take the whole thing apart again, and I apply finish to the interior panels. At this point, they are glued down and pin nailed in a few spots. I do this because if those interior panels shrink at all, I don't want any raw wood to be shown. And if I chose to finish it after the outside edges are on, there'd be certain parts of those interior panels that I wouldn't be able to get finish on. So they could potentially show and it would be ugly. So you saw me run the flush trim bit all the way around it. At this point, it's looking really good. And the reality sets in that I have to flip the door over and do the whole thing over again. So I'm not going to show you that process, but yeah, I had to do the entire thing for the other side. This part was a little nerve-wracking, and that's drilling the hole for the door for the latch and the handle. It was nerve-wracking just because I haven't done this before, and if I messed up, well, then I don't know what I would do. Thankfully, I didn't mess up. I actually did practice on a few scrap pieces of wood to make sure that I'd get it right. So you'll see here that I did get it right, luckily, and it ended up looking really good. I probably sat out here and just like played with the handle for 5 or 10 minutes because it was really satisfying to have this thing finally working. Now it's on to the hinges. So I ended up making a jig. I made sure that these hinges fit perfectly into the jig. Then I could double side tape the jig to the piece of wood that I needed to make the hinge mount for and cut it out. As you can see there, I was using a test piece first, again, because if I mess this up, it would really suck because I already have this trim inside the house and mounted. So I did a few test runs. After I run the router on it, I've got to use a chisel just to get those corners. But you'll see here that it allows me to get a really good fit, which was awesome. Now here's another mistake. A keen observer will see that I'm putting these hinges so that the door opens into the bathroom. You'll notice at the end of the video, the door ends up opening out of the bathroom. We had to switch it around because I actually did mess up putting the door handle on. I put the door handle on the wrong side of the door. After all of my careful planning, I did something as stupid as that. So when we went to put the door into the framing there, what we noticed is that it didn't really fit perfect. It kind of rubbed and hit in some weird spots. But if we flipped it 180 degrees around, it fit perfect. And that's because the door handle was on the wrong side of the door. So I ended up looking at what the code says about that, and the code says that you can have the door open out, at least in the state that we live in, and it's not in danger of really hitting any other doors, and it's not a high traffic area, so I'm not too concerned about it. If it ends up being a huge bother, well, we'll fix it in the future. Next, we had to make the actual part that the door is going to seal against. I bet this part has a name, but I don't know what the name of it is. So we start making that. This is no different than making the casing that we made originally for the framing. It's just smaller. So I do another bent lamination. I cut 2 more long vertical pieces. I pocket hole them together, and then I slide this into the frame. You'll see that the hinges are now on the other side of the framing. The other hinges I filled in. They ended up blending pretty well, and I throw some finish on. You'll see that also that piece that I put, this thin one I just made, it covers the screw holes that were added before. Now it's time to mount the door for the final time. My wife was at work, so I figured I'd try doing it by myself. It was a little bit sketchier, but it did end up working. I have at this point routed out hinge pockets on the door as well, and there you saw me drilling holes for the screws to go into. I ended up putting a 1/2 inch spacer block on the floor so that the door lined up with the hinges, and I threw some long screws into it, and luckily this thing fit almost perfect on the first try. It was really satisfying to have this thing close and look good. All right, now a keen observer might notice that we aren't quite done yet. I still need to add the trim that goes all the way around the wall. The reason I haven't done that yet is I want to get the drywall done first. That way I don't have to worry about accidentally painting the nice walnut trim that I'm going to make to go around the whole thing. So this is where the video ends. In future videos, I'll come back and I'll show this wall because I have a couple more plans of things I want to do to make this a little bit cooler. So thank you for watching this. If you're not subscribed, maybe subscribe, that would be cool. And like the video, leave a comment, all that kind of stuff. It helps me out. Thanks.